The Mediterranean world was changing. Old kingdoms still existed. Ancient traditions still survived. But a new power was steadily expanding across the horizon. Rome. At first, few people feared it. Rome was not the wealthiest civilization. It was not the oldest. It did not possess the legendary reputation of Egypt, nor the cultural prestige of Greece. Yet Rome possessed something many rivals underestimated: persistence. The Romans had an extraordinary ability to absorb setbacks, learn from failure, and return stronger than before. Again and again. That quality would soon be tested against one of the greatest rivals they would ever face. Across the Mediterranean Sea stood a wealthy city known as Carthage. Founded by Phoenician settlers centuries earlier, Carthage had grown into a commercial powerhouse. Its merchants sailed across vast distances. Its ships dominated trade routes. Its wealth flowed from commerce, industry, and maritime influence. While Rome expanded across land, Carthage ruled the sea. For a time, the two powers coexisted. But history rarely allows ambitious civilizations to ignore one another forever. As both expanded, their interests began to overlap. Trade routes became contested. Territories became disputed. Influence became competitive. Eventually, conflict became unavoidable. The result was a series of struggles historians now call the Punic Wars. Wars that would determine the future of the Mediterranean world. The First Punic War began in 264 BCE. At the time, Rome faced a major problem. The Romans were masters of land warfare. But Carthage possessed one of the most powerful navies on Earth. How could a land power defeat a maritime empire? Many civilizations might have accepted defeat. Rome chose adaptation. The Romans studied captured Carthaginian ships, copied their designs, built fleets of their own, then trained relentlessly. Within a surprisingly short period, Rome transformed itself into a naval power. The war dragged on for years. Battles were won. Battles were lost. Resources were exhausted. Fortunes changed repeatedly. But eventually, Roman determination prevailed. Carthage survived. Yet its position weakened. Rome emerged stronger. The conflict ended. But neither side forgot. And both knew another war was likely. The next confrontation would be far more dangerous, because it would involve one of history's greatest military minds. A commander whose name still commands respect more than 2,000 years later. Hannibal Barca. From childhood, Hannibal had been raised with a deep hostility toward Rome. According to later accounts, he swore an oath never to be Rome's friend. Whether the story is entirely true hardly matters. His actions certainly reflected it. When war returned in 218 BCE, Hannibal launched a campaign so bold that it still amazes military historians. Instead of attacking Rome where it expected, instead of approaching by sea, instead of choosing the obvious route, he did something extraordinary. He marched over the Alps. Imagine the challenge: thousands of soldiers, supply wagons, cavalry, war elephants, all moving through some of the most dangerous mountain terrain in Europe. Snow, ice, steep cliffs, harsh conditions, enemy attacks. Many men did not survive the journey. Many animals were lost. The expedition seemed impossible. Yet somehow, Hannibal emerged from the mountains and entered Italy itself. The shock was enormous. Rome had never expected an enemy army to appear this way. Suddenly, the war had arrived at its doorstep. And Hannibal was only getting started. Over the following years, he inflicted a series of devastating defeats upon Roman forces. Battle after battle, victory after victory. His tactical brilliance became legendary. Then came Cannae, one of the most studied battles in military history. In 216 BCE, Hannibal faced a Roman army that significantly outnumbered his own. Many commanders would have viewed the situation with concern. Hannibal saw opportunity. As the battle unfolded, he deliberately allowed the center of his army to slowly fall back. The Romans pushed forward, confident, aggressive, believing victory was within reach. But it was a trap. Gradually, Hannibal's forces surrounded them from both sides. The Romans suddenly found themselves trapped, compressed, unable to maneuver, unable to escape. The result was catastrophic, one of the greatest military disasters Rome had ever experienced. News spread across the Mediterranean. Many believed Rome was finished. Many expected surrender. Many expected collapse. Yet they underestimated the Romans. Because Rome possessed something even Hannibal struggled to defeat: endurance. The Republic refused to surrender, refused to negotiate, refused to quit. Instead, Rome adapted, rebuilt its armies, changed its strategy, and prepared for a long war. The struggle between Rome and Hannibal was far from over. In fact, the most dramatic chapters were still ahead, and the future of the ancient world hung in the balance. Because the question remained unanswered: could Rome survive Hannibal? Or would Hannibal destroy Rome itself? The answer would change history forever. Rome had survived Cannae, but survival came at an enormous cost. Entire armies had been destroyed. Thousands of soldiers were gone. Families mourned across Italy. Allies questioned Rome's future. Enemies sensed weakness. For many civilizations, such a disaster would have been the beginning of the end. Not for Rome, because Roman leaders understood something important. Defeating Hannibal in a single battle might be impossible, but defeating him over time was another matter entirely. One Roman commander in particular recognized this. His name was Quintus Fabius Maximus. History would remember him by a famous nickname: the Delayer. At first, many Romans hated his strategy. They wanted action. They wanted revenge. They wanted decisive victories. Fabius offered patience. Instead of directly confronting Hannibal, he avoided major battles. He harassed supply lines, protected key territory, forced Hannibal to keep moving. Again and again, Roman forces refused to fight on Hannibal's terms. The strategy frustrated many people. It appeared cowardly, unambitious, un-Roman. Yet it worked. Slowly, Rome recovered. New armies were trained. Resources were gathered. The Republic regained strength. Meanwhile, Hannibal remained far from home. Every year that passed increased the pressure upon him. His victories were impressive, but victories alone could not end the war. Rome simply refused to collapse. As the conflict continued, a new Roman leader began attracting attention. A young commander named Scipio. Ambitious, intelligent, determined. Like Hannibal, he possessed a talent for understanding warfare. Unlike many Roman generals, he studied his enemy carefully. He learned from Hannibal's successes, learned from Rome's failures, and eventually developed a bold plan. If Hannibal could threaten Rome by invading Italy, Rome could threaten Carthage by invading Africa. The proposal was risky, extremely risky, yet Scipio believed it offered the best chance for victory. Eventually, he received approval. Roman forces crossed into North Africa. The pressure on Carthage increased immediately. Suddenly, the war had reached its homeland. Carthaginian leaders faced a difficult decision. To defend the city, they needed their greatest commander, Hannibal. After years of campaigning in Italy, Hannibal was recalled. The man who had terrified Rome for over a decade was finally leaving. The stage was set for the war's final confrontation. In 202 BCE, two of history's greatest commanders met at a place called Zama. Scipio, Hannibal, Rome, Carthage. Everything had led to this moment. Both armies understood what was at stake: the future of the Mediterranean, the fate of two civilizations, the outcome of a conflict that had lasted for years. When the battle began, Hannibal once again relied upon many of the tactics that had brought him success. But this time he faced an opponent who had studied him carefully. Scipio anticipated his moves, adapted to the situation, maintained discipline under pressure. The battle remained fiercely contested. Yet as the fighting continued, momentum shifted toward Rome. Gradually, relentlessly, the advantage grew. Eventually, the outcome became clear. Rome had won. Hannibal was defeated. One of the greatest military careers in history had reached its turning point. The consequences were enormous. Carthage survived, but its power was broken. Rome emerged as the dominant force of the Western Mediterranean. The Republic had passed its greatest test, and the experience transformed it. Victories brought wealth. Territories expanded. Influence increased. Roman confidence soared. Yet success often creates new challenges. The larger Rome became, the harder it became to govern. Conquered territories needed administration. Generals accumulated power. Political rivalries intensified. Economic inequality grew. The republic that had once united against external enemies increasingly found itself divided from within. The seeds of future conflict had already been planted. Rome had defeated Carthage, but now it would face a different threat: itself. And in the generations ahead, ambitious leaders would emerge who believed they alone could solve Rome's problems. Some sought reform. Some sought power. Some sought glory. Among them would rise a man whose name remains famous more than 2,000 years later: Julius Caesar, a leader who would forever change the destiny of Rome. But before Caesar could rise, the Republic would first have to survive a century of political turmoil, social unrest, and growing instability. The age of Roman dominance had begun. Yet Rome's greatest challenges still lay ahead. Rome stood victorious. Its greatest rival had been defeated. Its influence stretched farther than ever before. Its armies were respected across the Mediterranean. To many citizens, it seemed the Republic had entered a golden age. Yet beneath the surface, problems were growing. Dangerous problems. The very success that made Rome powerful was also changing it. As territories expanded, enormous wealth flowed into the Republic. Gold, silver, land, resources, opportunities. Some Romans became incredibly rich. Others struggled to keep pace. The gap between rich and poor widened. Political tensions increased. Old institutions struggled to adapt. The Republic had been designed for a city-state, not a growing empire. And as Rome expanded, ambitious individuals began asking a dangerous question: should power belong to the Republic? Or to the people strong enough to control it? For generations, Rome's system had balanced competing interests. Senators debated policies. Magistrates served limited terms. Citizens participated in political life. The arrangement was imperfect, but it had survived. Now that balance was beginning to crack. Military commanders gained influence through victory. Popular leaders gained support through promises. Political factions battled for control. The Republic increasingly resembled a battlefield without swords. At least for the moment. One of the first major reformers to challenge the system was Tiberius Gracchus. He saw growing inequality. He saw ordinary citizens losing land and opportunity. He believed reform was necessary. Many agreed. Many disagreed. The conflict became intense. For perhaps the first time in generations, political disagreements turned openly violent. A dangerous precedent had been established. If opponents could not be defeated through debate, some people were willing to use force. Rome was changing, and not for the better. Over the following decades, instability increased. Ambitious generals discovered that loyal armies could become powerful political tools. Soldiers often developed stronger loyalty to commanders than to the Republic itself. That shift would have enormous consequences. Because eventually, one commander emerged who transformed Roman warfare completely. His name was Gaius Marius. Marius introduced significant military reforms. Men without property could now serve in the army. Professional soldiers became increasingly common. Military service offered opportunity, income, status, advancement. The reforms strengthened Rome's military capabilities. But they also created a new reality. Large numbers of soldiers now depended directly on successful generals. The relationship between army and commander grew stronger. The relationship between army and state grew weaker. Future leaders would take advantage of this change. One of them was Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a brilliant commander, a ruthless politician, and one of the first Romans to march an army against Rome itself. For centuries, such an act would have seemed unthinkable. Roman armies fought foreign enemies, not fellow citizens. Sulla shattered that tradition. His actions demonstrated a frightening truth. Military power could now determine political outcomes. The Republic survived, but the damage was done. A line had been crossed. Future generations would remember it. future generations would repeat it. As the 1st century BCE unfolded, Rome continued expanding. Victories brought more wealth, more territory, more prestige. Yet every success seemed to increase internal competition. Political rivalries intensified. Personal ambition flourished. The Republic produced remarkable leaders. But it also produced dangerous ones. Men who saw themselves not merely as servants of Rome, but as its future masters. Among them emerged 3 powerful figures: Crassus, Pompey, and Julius Caesar. Together they formed an unofficial alliance known today as the First Triumvirate. Each possessed influence. Each possessed ambition. Each wanted more power. For a time, the arrangement worked. Political goals were achieved. Opponents were managed. The balance held. But alliances built on ambition rarely last forever. Soon, rivalries emerged. Trust faded. Competition returned. And one man began separating himself from the others. Julius Caesar. An extraordinary politician. A gifted speaker. A brilliant military commander. And perhaps the most famous Roman who ever lived. At first, few could have predicted just how dramatically he would change history. Yet events were already moving in that direction. Because beyond the borders of Rome lay a vast region inhabited by numerous tribes and kingdoms. A region the Romans called Gaul. And Caesar was about to begin a campaign that would transform him from politician to legend. A campaign that would make him richer, more powerful, more famous, and more dangerous than anyone in Rome had anticipated. The fate of the Republic was about to become intertwined with the ambitions of a single man. And that man was Julius Caesar. The conquest of Gaul changed everything. Before the campaign, Julius Caesar was already an influential politician. After the campaign, he became something far more dangerous. A national hero. For nearly a decade, Caesar led Roman armies across vast regions of Western Europe. Tribes were defeated. Territories were absorbed. Roman influence expanded dramatically. Victory followed victory. His reputation grew with every passing year. So did his wealth. So did his power. And so did the concern of his political rivals back in Rome. Among Caesar's opponents, one figure stood above all others. Pompey. Once allies, now increasingly suspicious of one another. The relationship that had helped stabilize Roman politics was beginning to collapse. Many senators feared Caesar's growing popularity. They feared his military success. Most of all, they feared what he might do next. Because Caesar commanded something few politicians possessed: a loyal army. Thousands of experienced soldiers who had followed him through years of warfare. Men who trusted him. Men who respected him. Men who would follow him almost anywhere. As tensions increased, the Senate issued demands. Caesar was expected to surrender command, disband his army, return to Rome as a private citizen. On paper, the request seemed reasonable. In reality, everyone understood the stakes. If Caesar obeyed, his enemies could destroy him politically. If he refused, civil war might follow. The decision placed him at a crossroads. Literally. Separating Caesar's territory from Italy was a small river called the Rubicon. Roman law prohibited generals from crossing it with an army. The rule existed for a simple reason. It protected the Republic from military takeover. For centuries, commanders had respected that boundary. Now Caesar stood before it. Behind him waited loyal soldiers. Ahead of him waited uncertainty. History often turns on moments that seem ordinary at the time. A speech, a decision, a single step. Caesar made his choice. In 49 BCE, he crossed the Rubicon. The Republic would never be the same. Civil war began. News spread rapidly across Rome. Many were shocked. Others were terrified. The conflict everyone hoped to avoid had arrived. Former allies became enemies. Families found themselves divided. The future of the Republic hung in the balance. Pompey and many senators fled Rome. They believed time was on their side. Their resources remained considerable. Their influence remained substantial. And they still underestimated Caesar. Over the following years, Caesar moved with remarkable speed. Campaign after campaign. Battle after battle. Victory after victory. His military talent repeatedly shifted the balance in his favor. Eventually, the conflict culminated in a decisive confrontation. The Battle of Pharsalus. There, Caesar faced Pompey's forces in one of the most important battles of Roman history. Pompey possessed advantages. Many expected him to win. Yet Caesar had spent years overcoming impossible odds. This battle would prove no different. When the fighting ended, Pompey's army collapsed. The war was effectively decided. Pompey fled. Caesar emerged victorious. The most powerful man in Rome had become even more powerful. Soon afterward, Caesar entered Egypt. And there, another famous chapter of his story unfolded. A chapter involving one of history's most recognizable figures. Cleopatra, the young queen of Egypt. Intelligent, charismatic, politically skilled, their alliance shaped the future of both Rome and Egypt. Together, they became symbols of one of history's most famous political relationships. Yet while Caesar's influence continued growing, many Romans became increasingly uneasy. The Republic had been built upon shared authority, checks and balances, political compromise. Now one man seemed to stand above everyone else. Caesar accumulated titles, accumulated honors, accumulated influence. Supporters celebrated him. Critics feared him. Whispers began spreading throughout Rome. Was Caesar saving the Republic? Or ending it? The question divided the city. And eventually, some senators convinced themselves that drastic action was necessary. Among them stood men who believed they were defending Roman freedom, defending Roman tradition, defending the Republic itself. One of them was Brutus, a man Caesar trusted, a man history would never forget. In 44 BCE, Caesar entered a meeting of the Senate. He expected politics, debate, discussion. Instead, he walked into a conspiracy. Within moments, everything changed. The conqueror of Gaul, the victor of civil war, the most powerful Roman alive, was gone. News spread through the city like wildfire. Shock, fear, confusion. Nobody knew what would happen next. The conspirators believed they had saved the Republic. Instead, they unleashed something even more dangerous: chaos. Because Caesar's death did not restore stability. It destroyed what little stability remained. New alliances formed. Old rivalries returned. And from the turmoil emerged a young man few initially took seriously. A young man who would eventually become the first Roman emperor. His name was Octavian. And the age of the Roman Republic was coming to an end. The death of Julius Caesar did not save the Roman Republic. If anything, it accelerated its decline. The senators who participated in the conspiracy believed they had removed a threat. Instead, they created a power vacuum. And history has shown that power vacuums rarely remain empty for long. Across Rome, uncertainty spread. Political alliances shifted. Old loyalties dissolved. New ambitions emerged. Among the many figures competing for influence was a young man barely known to most Romans. Octavian. He was only 18 years old when Caesar died. Young, inexperienced, often underestimated. At first glance, he seemed an unlikely contender for power. Yet appearances can be deceiving. Before his death, Caesar had adopted Octavian as his heir. That decision changed everything. Suddenly, the young man possessed legitimacy, a connection to the most famous Roman of his generation. And perhaps most importantly, he possessed ambition. A great deal of ambition. Octavian quickly entered the dangerous world of Roman politics. There he encountered another powerful figure. Mark Antony, a skilled commander, a loyal supporter of Caesar, a man with considerable influence among the army. For a time, the two worked together. Alongside a third leader named Lepidus, they formed what became known as the Second Triumvirate. Their goal was simple: defeat Caesar's enemies, restore order, consolidate power, at least officially. In reality, each man understood that Rome could not be shared forever. Eventually, someone would rule. The only question was who. The triumvirate moved decisively. Caesar's assassins were hunted down. Opposition was crushed. Political enemies were eliminated. The Republic continued drifting farther from its traditional foundations. Power increasingly concentrated in fewer hands. And eventually, as many expected, the alliance began to fracture. Lepidus faded from importance. The struggle narrowed to two dominant figures: Octavian and Mark Antony. Their rivalry would shape the future of the ancient world. The conflict became even more complicated because of one woman: Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, one of the most famous rulers in history. Following Caesar's death, Cleopatra formed a powerful alliance with Mark Antony. Together they became a formidable political force. Their relationship fascinated contemporaries, inspired loyalty, generated controversy, and alarmed Octavian. To many Romans, Antony appeared increasingly influenced by Egypt, increasingly distant from Roman traditions, increasingly willing to place personal relationships above political responsibility. Octavian seized the opportunity. He launched a campaign not only against Antony but also against his reputation. Public opinion became a battlefield. Propaganda spread. Accusations multiplied. The rivalry intensified. Eventually, war became inevitable. The decisive confrontation arrived in 31 BCE, near the coast of Greece, at a place called Actium. The battle that followed would determine the future of Rome, and perhaps the future of the Mediterranean world. Massive fleets assembled. Commanders prepared. Both sides understood the stakes. Victory would bring control. Defeat would bring ruin. When the battle began, Octavian's forces gradually gained the advantage. Confusion spread among Antony's fleet. Coordination weakened. Momentum shifted. By the end of the confrontation, the outcome was clear. Octavian had won. The war was effectively over. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Egypt. Their final chapter would soon come to an end. With their defeat, no rival remained capable of challenging Octavian's authority. For the first time in generations, a single individual stood above all others in the Roman world. Yet Octavian understood something important. Romans hated kings. They hated the idea of monarchy. The memory of Rome's ancient kings remained deeply unpopular. If he openly declared himself king, resistance would follow. So Octavian chose a different path. A more subtle path. A smarter path. Instead of calling himself king, he accepted a new title: Augustus. The revered one. The honored one. The title sounded modest. The reality was anything but. In practice, Augustus became the most powerful man in the Roman world. The Roman Republic still existed on paper. Its institutions remained. Its traditions survived. But real power now rested with one individual. The Roman Empire had begun. And under Augustus, something remarkable happened. Peace. After generations of civil wars, instability, and political chaos, the empire entered a period of relative stability. Historians call it the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. Trade flourished. Cities expanded. Roads connected distant territories. Commerce increased. Population grew. The empire reached extraordinary levels of prosperity. For millions of people, Rome provided something their ancestors rarely enjoyed: predictability, security, opportunity. The empire stretched from Britain to Egypt, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Middle East. It became one of the greatest political entities the world had ever seen. Yet even at its height, forces were already beginning to shape its future. New religions were emerging. New ideas were spreading. New challenges were approaching. Because no empire, no matter how powerful, escapes history forever. The Roman Empire would reach astonishing heights. But it would also face crises unlike anything it had encountered before. And among the events that would transform the ancient world was the life of a man born in a distant corner of the empire. A man whose influence would eventually surpass emperors, kings, and conquerors. His name was Jesus. And his story is where our next chapter begins. If you enjoyed this journey through the fall of the Roman Republic and the birth of the Roman Empire, make sure to subscribe and join us for the next episode. Because the story of civilization is about to enter one of its most transformative eras. The rise of Christianity, the height of Roman power, the crisis of the empire, and eventually, the fall of Rome itself. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next chapter of civilization. The Roman Empire stood at the height of its power. Its roads stretched across continents. Its armies guarded distant frontiers. Its cities buzzed with trade, culture, and ambition. To many people living at the time, Rome must have seemed eternal. An empire too large to fail, too powerful to fall. Yet history has a way of humbling even the greatest civilizations. And the next transformation would begin not with an army, not with a king, not with a conquest, but with a man born in a distant province on the edge of the empire. In the Roman province of Judea, around the beginning of the 1st century, a child was born whose influence would eventually reshape much of human history. His name was Jesus. At the time, nothing about his birthplace suggested global significance. No palace, no army, no wealth, no political authority. Rome barely noticed. Yet some of the most powerful changes in history begin quietly. As Jesus grew older, he began teaching throughout the region. His message focused on compassion, forgiveness, faith, humility, love for others. Many people found hope in his words. Others viewed his growing influence with concern. Religious leaders debated his teachings. Roman authorities watched developments carefully. Eventually, tensions reached a breaking point. Jesus was arrested, tried, and executed. From Rome's perspective, the matter seemed finished. Another local preacher had come and gone. The empire moved on. History did not. Because after his death, followers continued spreading his message. Small communities appeared. Then more communities. Then more. The movement survived and gradually expanded. At first, Christians faced suspicion, misunderstanding, sometimes persecution. Yet despite these challenges, the faith continued growing. People shared beliefs with friends. Families passed teachings to future generations. Ideas moved along Roman roads, across Roman trade routes, throughout Roman cities. Ironically, the empire helped spread the very religion it often struggled to understand. Meanwhile, Rome itself continued reaching extraordinary heights. During the 2nd century, the empire governed tens of millions of people. Its territory stretched across much of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Merchants transported goods over immense distances. Engineers constructed aqueducts, bridges, and roads. Cities flourished. For many citizens, life was stable, predictable, prosperous. One emperor in particular became famous for representing the ideals of Roman leadership: Marcus Aurelius. Unlike many rulers, Marcus Aurelius was not remembered primarily for conquest. He was remembered for reflection, for philosophy, for wisdom. Even while governing an empire, he spent time writing about discipline, responsibility, and human nature. His writings continue inspiring readers nearly 2,000 years later. Yet even during his reign, signs of trouble were emerging. Threats along the borders increased. Economic pressures grew. Political instability simmered beneath the surface. The empire remained powerful, but maintaining such a vast territory required enormous resources. And eventually, the strain became impossible to ignore. After the death of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman world entered a difficult period. A period historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Emperors rose and fell with astonishing speed. Civil wars erupted. Armies proclaimed their own leaders. Economic problems intensified. Foreign invasions increased. Disease spread across parts of the empire. For decades, Rome seemed trapped in constant instability. Imagine living during this period. One year, a new emperor ruled. The next year, another. Rumors spread constantly. Prices fluctuated. Security weakened. The future became uncertain. The empire that once appeared invincible suddenly looked vulnerable. Some people feared Rome's collapse was near. Yet once again, Rome adapted. New leaders emerged. Reforms were introduced. The empire survived. But it emerged changed. One of the most important figures of this transformation was Constantine, a ruler whose decisions would alter the course of history. In the early 4th century, Constantine rose to power during another period of political struggle. After securing victory, he made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a few generations earlier. He embraced Christianity. The religion that had once faced persecution now gained imperial support. The consequences were enormous. Churches expanded. Christian communities grew. The faith spread throughout the empire at an unprecedented pace. A movement that began in a distant province became one of the defining forces of Western civilization. Constantine also founded a new capital, a city strategically positioned between Europe and Asia, a city that would become one of history's most important centers of power. Constantinople, the future heart of the Byzantine Empire. At the time, few could have predicted just how important that city would become. Because while Constantine's reforms strengthened parts of the empire, deeper challenges remained. The Roman world was changing, and not always for the better. Population pressures increased. Political divisions persisted. External threats multiplied. The empire's borders stretched across enormous distances. Defending them became increasingly difficult. For centuries, Rome had expanded. Now it struggled simply to maintain what it already possessed. And beyond the frontiers, new groups were rising. New peoples. New kingdoms. New migrations. The ancient world was preparing for another transformation. One that would eventually bring an end to the Western Roman Empire itself. And when that moment arrived, the world would never be the same.